My brother, Julian, is a self-help guru with millions of listeners. His podcast, The Authentic Man, preaches radical honesty and integrity. To the world, he's a saint. To me, he was the voice in my headphones, the man whose success I built in my editing bay. I ignored the gaslighting, the emotional abuse, and the stolen credit because he was my brother. But one late night, while cleaning up his audio, I heard something no one else was meant to hear. A tiny sound that unraveled a lie so vast it defied belief. What do you do when a paragon of truth is living a double life? You don't get mad. You get a better microphone. Listen to the full story to hear how I used my audio skills to craft the one episode of his podcast he never wanted the world to hear. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch. The lie revealed itself not in a shout, but in a whisper. A 1-2-second fragment of audio buried deep in the raw tracks of my brother's podcast. It was 3 a.m. in my cramped little studio, a converted garage in a quiet suburb outside Denver. The only light came from the glow of my dual monitors, painting the soundproofing foam on the walls in shifting blues and purples. I was doing what I always did, making my brother Julian sound perfect. His podcast, The Authentic Man, was a phenomenon. Millions of downloads a week. He was the handsome, charismatic guru of radical honesty, the guy who taught men how to be better husbands, fathers, and leaders. And I was the ghost in his machine, the sound engineer, the editor. The one who spent countless hours surgically removing his every verbal stumble, his every awkward pause, his every sharp inhale before a lie. That night's episode was about marital integrity. Ironic, I know. I was listening back to the raw recording on my professional-grade headphones, the kind that pick up the sound of a mouse breathing in the corner. Julian was in the middle of a soaring monologue about the sanctity of a promise made to one's partner. And that promise, his voice boomed, rich and resonant, I as a fortress. You build it brick by brick with honesty, and you defend it with your life. Then, in the brief pause he left for dramatic effect, I heard it. It was almost nothing. A faint, high-pitched sound in the background of his recording, which he'd made in his hotel room on a book tour. To a normal listener, it would have been less than static, but to me, it was a signal. It was the distinct electronic chirp of a baby monitor turning on. My blood went cold. Julian and his wife Karen didn't have a baby. They had 2 teenagers, and they had been trying and failing to have a 3rd child for years. It was a well-known part of their public narrative, a vulnerability Julian often shared with his audience to show how real he was. A baby monitor? It made no sense. I isolated the frequency, looped the 1-2 seconds, and boosted the gain. Chirp wee, no doubt about it. My hand trembled as I scrolled through the rest of the 90-minute recording, my ears on high alert. For the first hour, nothing, just Julian being Julian. Then, around the 74-minute mark, I found something else. He was interviewing a guest via Zoom, and for a split second he must have thought he'd hit the mute button on his microphone to cough. He hadn't. And under the sound of his cough I heard his voice, muffled and distant, say 2 words. They were soft, but on my equipment they were as clear as a bell. Hey little man. It was the voice he used when he talked to my golden retriever. A gentle, loving, paternal tone that he never, ever used with me. The sound sent a jolt through my system, a visceral reaction that bypassed my brain and went straight to my gut. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a stray TV sound from the next room. This was something real. And it was something he was hiding. My relationship with Julian has always been one of servitude. He's 5 years older, and from the moment I was born he was the star, and I was the satellite, caught in his gravitational pull. He was the handsome, popular athlete. I was the skinny, quiet kid who was good with computers. Our parents, in their own well-meaning way, reinforced this. Leo, can you help your brother with his history project? You're so good at the research part. And Julian, be nice to your brother. He looks up to you. He was a master of the trauma bond before I even knew what that was. 99% of the time, he treated me with a casual, dismissive arrogance. I was his glorified tech support. But then that 1% of the time, he would throw me a bone. He'd put his arm around my shoulder after I'd pulled an all-nighter fixing his website and say, "Couldn't do it without you, little brother." And And that tiny crumb of validation was enough to sustain me. I was codependent on his approval, a desperate addiction that had defined my entire life. When he decided to start the podcast, it was a natural fit. He had the voice and the face for it. I had the technical skills. "We'll be partners, Leo," he'd said, his eyes shining with ambition. Richard & Son Developments was the line he'd used in my input, but for us, it was the Knight Brothers. "We'll build an empire." But there were never any partnership papers. My name was never mentioned on the show. I was paid a stipend, a fraction of what a professional producer would make, while he was signing 5-figure sponsorship deals. Whenever I'd bring it up, the gaslighting would begin. "Leo, come on, we're family. Are you really going to start bean counting with me?" he'd say, feigning a wounded look. "I'm building this for us. All the money is going right back into the business. You're being short-sighted." Or, if I pointed out a mistake he'd made, he'd flip it. "Wow, you're really stressed out, man. Maybe you're not cut out for this level of pressure. I'm just trying to give you an opportunity, and you're getting all negative on me." So I learned to be helpless. It was easier than fighting. I just put my head down, edited the audio, and took the scraps of praise he offered. I told myself I was being a good brother, that I was paying my dues. The cognitive dissonance was deafening. The man who preached authenticity on the air was the one who made me feel most invisible in real life. But I buried it. I had to. He was my brother, my boss, my only real link to a world of success I desperately wanted to be a part of. After discovering the audio clues, I couldn't sleep. I started digging. My paranoia became a quiet, methodical investigation. Julian's life was an open book, but I started reading between the lines. I went through his public travel schedule for his book tour and cross-referenced it with his credit card statements, which I had access to as his de facto business manager. I found a pattern. In every city, Seattle, Portland, Chicago, there were the expected expenses. The fancy hotel where the publisher put him up, the expensive restaurants for schmoozing, the Ubers. But there were other, quieter expenses. A recurring charge from a pharmacy chain, always for the same amount. Diapers, formula, another charge, always on the second day in each city, for a car rental. A sensible sedan, not his usual luxury SUV. And then there were the hotels. He was expensing the 5-star hotel from his publisher, but there were separate charges, from his personal account, for rooms at a nondescript residence inn on the other side of town. 2 hotel rooms in every city. The final piece fell into place when I hacked his personal cloud storage. It was pathetically easy. His password was our childhood dog's name followed by the number 1. He was a narcissist. It never occurred to him that someone might be clever enough to look. He thought he was untouchable. Inside there was a folder titled Projects, and inside that, another folder titled Oak Brook. It wasn't a project, it was a life. Hundreds of photos and videos. A woman I'd never seen before, with kind eyes and a warm smile, and a little boy. A toddler, maybe a year and a half old, with my brother's same dark, wavy hair in my eyes. There were videos of Julian pushing him on a swing. A picture of the 3 of them carving a pumpkin. A video of the baby taking his first steps in a generic-looking apartment. Julian's voice in the background, thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. Pure, unadulterated joy. And then, I saw the dates. He had been with this woman for over 3 years. The baby was born around the same time Julian and Karen had made a big, tearful public announcement about their final failed round of IVF. He hadn't just had an affair. He had constructed an entirely separate existence. A second family. And he was funding it, I soon discovered, through the podcast's most beloved initiative, the Authentic Man Family Fund. It was a charity he'd set up to help families in crisis, and his listeners donated to it in droves. He was siphoning off thousands of dollars a month, laundering his double life through the generosity of his own audience. I felt a profound, soul-crushing sickness. This wasn't just a betrayal of his wife, Karen. It was a betrayal of me, of his audience, of every single person who believed in his carefully constructed lie. The fortress of integrity he preached about wasn't just a metaphor. He had built a real one around his secret, and he'd used my labor and his listeners' money as the bricks and mortar. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the garage studio pressing in on me. The man who lectured the world about honesty was the most profound liar I had ever known. And I, his little brother, the quiet man in the background, was the only person in the world who had the complete, unedited audio of his entire deception. The question was no longer what he was hiding. The question was, what was I going to do about it? If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch. For a week I did nothing. I was paralyzed. The knowledge sat in my stomach like a block of ice, a cold, heavy mass of pure dread. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Julian, "Hey, need the final cut for Thursday's episode ASAP," a wave of nausea would wash over me. I'd answer on it and then stare at my screen, at the smiling face of the little boy who was my nephew. A boy whose existence was a secret that could detonate a dozen lives, including my own. The trauma bond was fighting a war with my conscience. One part of me screamed that this was my brother, my family, that exposing him would be a monstrous act of betrayal. It would destroy Karen, who, for all her faults, didn't deserve this. It would destroy his kids. It would destroy him. The familiar, conditioned response of learned helplessness urged me to just delete the files, erase what I'd found, and go back to being the silent, compliant ghost in the machine. It was the path of least resistance. It was the path of self-preservation. But then I'd think of the lie, not just the affair, but the sheer, breathtaking narcissism of it all. The charity, using people's goodwill as a slush fund, using his platform of radical honesty as the ultimate camouflage. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator of people's faith. He'd taken my work, my loyalty, and the trust of millions, and he'd twisted it all into a shield for his own selfish desires. The cognitive dissonance was no longer something I could live with. I had to choose a side. I couldn't be loyal to both Julian and the truth. The decision to act was crystallized by Julian himself. He called me on a Tuesday, his voice agitated. "Leo, I just looked at the preliminary numbers for the family fund this quarter. They're down." "Why are they down?" I took a slow breath. "The economy's a little shaky, man. Donations are down everywhere. Unacceptable," he snapped. "I need you to cut together a promo. A real tearjerker. Use that clip from the veteran we helped last year. And splice in some of my stuff about the importance of giving back. I want people to feel it in their gut. We need to boost those numbers now." He was asking me to create propaganda for his fraud. He wanted me to use my skills to manipulate people into funding his secret life more effectively. That was it. The war was over, my loyalty to him shattered. A new, cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about forming a boundary so absolute that he could never cross it again. My plan wasn't to leak the audio to a journalist. That would be messy. He could deny it, spin it, paint me as a bitter, jealous brother. No, I had a much better idea. I was going to use the platform I had built for him to deliver the truth. I was going to produce one final episode of The Authentic Man. A special episode. For the next 2 weeks I lived a double life of my own. By day I worked on his regular episodes, sending him flawless cuts, acting like nothing was wrong. By night, I worked on my project. I became an artist of his lies. I was no longer just an editor, I was a storyteller. I had thousands of hours of his raw audio, a library of his every word, his every breath, his every pontification on truth and honor. I started with the baby monitor chirp. I cleaned it up, amplified it, and made it the chilling recurring motif of the episode. I took his grand statements about honesty and intercut them with the evidence of his deception. I wove it all together. His voice booming, "Your family deserves your whole truth," followed by the undeniable sound of him booking a room at the Residence Inn on his personal card. His voice filled with fake sincerity, "We have to be accountable for every dollar," followed by the audio from his own bank's website as a screen reader voice clearly stated, "Transfer of $5,000 from the Authentic Man Family Fund to personal checking, confirmed." I recorded that myself. I took his heartfelt monologues about his love for Karen and I layered, just beneath the surface, the faint, muffled sounds from the videos in his secret photo folder. The sound of him laughing with his other son. The sound of the other woman calling his name. It was a symphony of his hypocrisy, conducted by the one person he never saw coming. The masterpiece was the ending. I took the audio from the night he thought he'd hit the mute button. I isolated his cough and removed it. Then I took his 2 whispered words, "Hey, little man," and I cleaned them up until they were crystal clear. I let them hang in the silence for 3 full seconds. And then, I followed it with the sound that started it all. The high-pitched chirp of the baby monitor. And then, fade to black. The episode was exactly 30 minutes long. The perfect, devastating commute-length listen. The night before his next scheduled episode was due to drop, I logged into his podcast hosting platform. I had all the passwords. I deleted the episode he was expecting. A vapid interview with another self-help author, and I uploaded mine. I titled it, Episode 157. A special announcement from Julian Knight. I scheduled it to go live at 5 a.m. the next morning. Then I shut down my computer, packed a single bag and drove to a small motel 100 miles away. I turned off my phone. The fallout was nuclear. I didn't see it firsthand, but I heard about it later from mutual friends and read about it in the dozens of articles that were published within hours. Millions of people woke up to that episode. His entire empire of authenticity crumbled to dust before he had even had his morning coffee. The story went viral on a scale I couldn't have imagined. The Authentically was trending worldwide by noon. His sponsors dropped him. His publisher canceled his contract. The DA's office launched an investigation into the charity fraud. Karen, of course, filed for divorce. I stayed away for a month. I needed the space to decompress, to let the shockwaves settle. It wasn't a celebration, it was a funeral. A funeral for the brother I thought I had, for the family I thought I knew, and for the part of me that had spent 30 years craving the approval of a con man. When I finally came back to Denver, I felt lighter. The suffocating weight of his presence in my life was gone. I got an email from a lawyer representing a group of his listeners who were putting together a class action lawsuit. They wanted me to testify. They wanted the raw audio files. I sent them everything. I sold all my high-end audio equipment and used the money to start over. Not as a ghost for someone else's ego, but as myself. I started my own small company, producing audiobooks and podcasts for independent authors and nonprofits, people with real stories to tell. It doesn't pay as much, but for the first time in my life, the work feels clean. It feels honest. It feels like my own. My name is on the door. My name is in the credits. And when I listen back to the work I do now, the only thing I hear is the truth.